So let me go on to the Ed Code, and it says, any person, regardless of sex, who is 18 years of age or older, a citizen of the state, a resident of the school district, a registered voter, and who is not disqualified by the Constitution or laws of the state from holding a civil office is eligible to be elected or appointed a member of a governing board of a school district without further qualifications. So really, we don't have the option of saying, here are some additional qualifications we want. Although in your selection process, you would want to find the one that will serve the district best, but no one can be disqualified. So, and in fact, Karen contacted the Registrar of Voters, and the Registrar of Voters is available to establish the eligibility of the candidates that come forward to you, and will submit those names to the Registrar of Voters before any of the interviews are actually held, so that you would be assured with documentation from the Registrar of Voters that the candidates you're interviewing are eligible to be interviewed and anyone unselected.
Okay, a question that was brought up to me was, can the district require fingerprinting of board members who may be eligible candidates, given that if a candidate has been convicted of a felony or anything like that, is there anything that the Constitution or laws of the state prohibit someone from being elected into a public office if they have some sort of, any sort of record? For example, a registered sex offender, as an example, could by design of being a registered sex offender, couldn't be on public education campus. That was the question that was brought up to me, and I didn't know the answer to that.
I wish I knew too. I'm trying to think back. I have not run for a board seat now for 20 years, so it's difficult to remember. I don't remember if board member or candidates for board seats are required to have fingerprints done. I can't remember. So we'll check on that. But I believe if a citizen can file for candidacy for an election and can be elected and is not required to have fingerprinting done, I would be concerned that you would require that for an appointment. So let's check on that, and if it is required, we'll make sure to include that. We need to include that in the announcement so that people will understand.
Yeah, and when this came up, it was actually suggested, and we will now have a process that does even the current sitting board members be fingerprinted as a matter of process for future, as a safety for the board.
Well, do you have a policy on that?
I don't know. It literally just came up recently, so we'll look and see. We'll look and see. Yeah, we'll look that up.
You'll be on a much solid ground if you had a policy that specifies that all board members sitting or being elected or appointed would be fingerprinted. And if you can do that, I think that will then, that's actually the answer to your question. If you actually are going to be fingerprinting the sitting board members, then reflect that in a policy, and then you won't be challenged by any candidate.
Yeah, it'd be great to know if there already is a policy.
Right, or
like
a legal requirement, yeah.
Yeah. Probably not.
Yeah.
But, and I'm not sure you can actually be elected to a public office if you have a convicted felony. I know you're not allowed to vote, but well, that's, if it's a felony, typically those would be felony, you know, registered state. When you're registered, by definition, it's felony.
You know, but I'm sorry. I'm not aware of those questions being asked of me.
Yeah, I don't.
You know, so I think it's a great idea to make it a policy, but it should be for everybody, not just the new people coming in. I agree with that.
Now, there is a provision in the Ed Code, if you look at the quotation I have, which says, who is not disqualified by the Constitution or laws of the state from holding a civil office.
Right.
So if, right. So I would assume, and let's check that with the Registrar of Voters, they may do a reference check or a criminal record check to see if there is any such element that would prevent them from running for office or being appointed in an office. But we will do that. We'll make sure that we have all the answers. And since Karen already made her connection with the Registrar of Voters office, it wouldn't be difficult for us to get that information.
Kagem, I noticed that this now goes into basically the process for, interview and selection.
Right.
What about the solicitation? Is there a recommended process for solicitation? Do we just post it on the website? Do we advertise in the newspaper? Do we, what is?
The requirement is that it is advertised. And the usual, of course, is to have an ad in the newspaper.
Okay.
With a website, I would recommend that the same ad be placed on the website.
Okay.
And in fact, some of the discussion today is going to reflect as to what we're going to put in that ad, announcing the vacancy and announcing the process. And those are decisions, guidance that you have to give us so that we can move forward as you desire in terms of.
Well, we
putting
just might
together.
want to put that on the timeline here as well.
Correct. Actually, on the next page, on the timeline, we have the specific items. Item number 2, a
Got
press release is issued
Yep, got it.
announcing vacancy and
Okay.
appointment process published in local newspapers and district website. So that's
Okay.
already in the timeline. So the question that I believe needs to be answered, that does the board really want to do exactly what the board policy says, that a number of board members, less than a quorum, would meet and review all the applications? If that's the desire of the board, you can do that, but the Registrar of Voters is going to determine who is qualified and who is not. And the Ed Code clearly says you can't add your own qualifications to it. They're very set, clearly set qualifications for.
Yeah,
for
I mean,
appointment.
but well, let me just ask then, when it says a committee consisting of whatever shall ensure that applicants,
Right.
Shall means
Right.
you
It doesn't give you
shall
an
do
option.
it.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. And I
So-
don't know why CSBA has, this is a CSBA recommended bylaw. So, which then it requires that the three members of you would form a committee to review the applications or the names
Yeah,
or
I'd
whatever
suggest
structure
maybe
we
we do
want.
that and ask, but prior to, we'd ask the Registrar of Voters to validate that they meet
Yeah.
all of the
Yeah.
requirements.
Yeah, that's my concern too. It says shall, you don't have the option of
Right.
doing it or not doing it.
Right.
But it is your option as to what the committee is supposed to do. And yeah, we're going to review them, but it will be based on information received from the Registrar of Voters.
Okay.
And that will be, it would be more like a formality than actually any function.
Yeah, board, does that make sense, board members?
I was just going to ask, so we're going to wait until after they pass the check, the background check, and then they're going to look at the applicants? Or are
Yeah,
they
there's
gonna-
really no point for board members to spend their time
Okay.
looking at applicants if the applicant
Right,
is
okay.
not eligible because of whatever reason. And since the Registrar of Voters is going to take care of that for us, I would suggest that, as the board president said, that we just do it after we get the verification. The next item is to establish the interview structure. There have been different kinds of thoughts that I've heard from in fact, from the board meeting that we had on April 21, there were two schools of thought in the discussion. One was to have a formal interview with 10, 15 questions asked, and the board members then will judge as to the quality of the answers, and then based on the answers, each board member will select the one they think is the best. And we have a structure for that as well. The other option was, let's not ask questions, is an interview structure. Let the interview be that invite the candidate and let them make a statement. And here's, I think, what we need to consider. If you have an interview of, say, 10 questions, you're going to have to allow at least 20 minutes per candidate. The question is, we're not sure how many candidates will be there. What if you have 50 candidates? You're going to be interviewing for several days before you come to a conclusion. The disadvantage of just a statement, then you haven't given the candidates specific elements to respond to. So the question that needs to be answered today, will the interview consist of specific questions, 10, 12, 15, that we will be looking at in terms of asking those questions, or do we just ask for a statement, but then we have to give criteria or guidelines as to what they need to address in that statement?
Which I think that's the right answer. I mean, you give some criteria, and the board is soliciting, candidates for filling a vacancy. The board is involved in these priorities. This is our emphasis, and we want to select the best candidate that can best meet our students' needs and the strategic priorities of the district. And then, lay out the process, and they address those. So if we give them at least enough of the things that we want them to touch on, we can judge their ability to formulate an answer, formulate why they think they're best, how they fit with the team, how they fit with our student achievement objectives, and then, how they might interface with the board and things. So, to me, I'd go more towards that process. But Barbara?
I would prefer a combination of both. Have a criteria for them to have a statement, and then have a few questions to follow up. A few questions that we could ask them. Because a statement is just a statement. I would like to see how they actually, what background they have, what, commitment they have, what,
Well, the point
where
is
they
you can
stand.
ask them to do that. And if you ask the questions, you got to ask everybody the same question.
right, I would say a few
Everybody
questions.
but why wouldn't you just publish that in the criteria and then have them address it in a statement?
Well, this is a very important position.
Well, okay, I'm
And
just asking
I,
the question.
my preference would be that they make a statement, and then we ask some key questions, so that we get to a feel for, how they would respond,
I do want to ask a question. For instance, when you go to employment, there's many applicants. You don't interview all of them. You select maybe 10 or so, or however many. If there is that many applicants, like you mentioned, maybe what if there's 50 applicants? Is there other options that we could try using to where, based on the resume, the committee can look at narrowing it down and then bringing some other suggestions?
Yeah. If the committee is going to bring the number of candidates down to whatever number, I believe that needs to be a board decision. Because even the candidates that you eliminate through that process by a committee that is not the full board, then it's not a board action to say we are not going to interview those individuals. Now, you can still have a committee do the screening of the applications, submit that to the board at a regular board meeting with their recommendation. The board then looks at the recommendation, will have an opportunity to look at all the applicants, and then determine if they're going to accept the committee's recommendation. That will add another step, but in that way, then the committee, reference to a committee reviewing the applications becomes not perfunctory, but actually would serve a purpose in order to reduce the number of candidates that will actually come for an interview. Yes, Barbara?
Thank you. I would like to see a combination, because what Barbara is saying, sometimes some people can stuff to the point that you think they're ready to become a general, because they've had help and whatnot in putting together a package. But I think a lot will depend on, if we have 20 applicants, we need to have one process. I don't want 20 applicants and have 20 applicants to answer 5 questions, because it's going to take forever, and by the time you get to the 12th one, you're going to tune out anyways. I prefer taking a look at a what if, and assuming we're going to have 5 or less, let's put together a process. And if we are going to have more than 5, another process. And that way, at that time, we can vet the best process. But, at least we'll have something in the working. But I think a lot's going to depend on the number of people. Or the number of applicants.
The question is, how are you going to publicize it? Which direction is it going to be? Interview? I guess you can just say they will be interviewed, and your interpretation of interview could be any of the above. Or you could include, if you're going to have an extensive application that has substantive questions, not just, have you done this and this and this, just to see if you have the experience, then you could do that through the application process, but it needs to come back to the board for board action on these are the candidates we will interview based on the review of their applications that they have filed.
Okay, and another thing we can do, Redlands just went through this about 6 months ago. Redlands Unified School District, and maybe we can talk to them about what process they used. I think they only had 3 or 4 candidates, but we could also, look at how they selected.
This is the largest district that I'm involved in, that I've been involved in terms of doing, appointment through filling a seat through the appointment process. In all of my experiences, I agree with you, Margaret, that we have maybe 10, 8, 6 are the numbers that come to my mind in the various situations where I was involved. But none of them were the size of San Bernardino City Unified School District, which lends me to believe that there'll be more applicants simply because of numbers and size. So that is a decision that needs to be made, and really the board has to make that decision and give us direction as to which way they would want to do it. Now, there is one other way of I don't know if you call it a happy medium, that you could have the statement, as President Gallo mentioned, but then you may allow clarifying questions. Now, you have to be careful as a body. You can't ask one person a question and not ask the other person. But if it's only clarifying questions, your questions will depend on what the candidate said. So you can't introduce something new. If you're going to introduce something new, then you have to introduce that to every candidate so that you have consistency in the questions. And that's where it becomes meaningful to have an interview with, with 8, 10 questions. So that's a decision that needs to be made in advance of the process so that candidates will know exactly how the process will go.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Flores. I know it's good to have that interaction, some kind of a, you don't want it just scripted, because people can do that. I hear you, and that, I think we've done that before. I don't remember what we did that for, but it was an interview of some candidate. And
I know that interviews that I've conducted over the years, and I've chaired committees at the university, both for deans, BPs, university professors. They do have to make a statement, and then we have to follow the law in terms of the same exact questions that we give for every single candidate, so that we, are equitable. So, I mean, those.
Yeah, those are less
questions.
valuable, though,
Yeah.
in my mind, because if you give them to them and they all get them and they're all the same.
No, you don't give them the questions.
Okay, well then you have to really.
We have the questions, and we're the ones that, when I say give, I said we have
Right.
to use the same questions for every candidate.
Then what we would have to ensure is that the other candidates aren't able to sit in the public session.
That's what I was going to mention
hear
too,
it.
because then that would be the advantage for the other
Yeah,
candidates. to
and you
listen to the
can't really
questions.
stop them from being here either.
Or at home watching TV.
Well, it's not live.
If it's not,
No,
it's never
not live, no.
advertised like that.
It's never
And
live.
that was
But
a
they-
concern of mine.
Or
if
they
it's,
could receive a text. I
But-
don't know.
Well, they
but-
could be here. They could literally sit in the room.
Yes, and all you can do, it's an open meeting, and open meeting law does not allow you to say to somebody, even if they're a candidate, please leave the room. But there's a statement at the bottom of my page 1 where it says when candidates are notified of their appointment time, they should be reminded that it would be unprofessional to listen into the other candidates' interview, especially those that precede them. So you just ask them to. And what we have done, we've always had an additional room with no connection to the boardroom where the interview is being done. and staff members, and I'll work with Dr. Marsden to assign staff. Staff members will meet the candidate, will usher them to that waiting room, and there'll be no connection, and they'll stay in that waiting room until they're called in for their interview. By doing that, you have eliminated the possibility of hearing the answers. The other question is, if you're going to select questions, I believe the only way you can select questions without the public knowing in advance what the questions are is to ask the administration to prepare appropriate questions for the interview process. Otherwise, if you discuss them in open session, and that's the only place you can discuss them, then you've announced the questions, which goes back to, everybody knows, which is another way of doing it. But what we have done, at least in my experiences, staff prepared the questions, and therefore the questions were not announced until the day of the interviews, and then of course people were requested to be in another room.
I raise issue with that because it's our board members. I mean, it's a board member, not a staff position. And if we have a committee, we could give, board members could give the questions to the committee, and the committee could choose the questions that they want to present, because it is a board,
Right.
it is a board member, it's not a staff, no offense, it's not a staff position, it's a board member position.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
board
so
members
a
should be
committee of the board
generating.
could do that.
Yeah. we
The
should
committee,
be-
less
we
than
should
a
be-
quorum, less than a quorum can do that, yes.
But we could give them our questions, and they would then choose the questions.
Yeah, that would be doable, and I think it would keep the integrity of the interview process.
We keep it short. 3 or 4 questions.
Yeah, you got to keep it short, yeah.
With the timing on it.
And time
Right.
limit on answers and things like that.
Right. In fact, I would suggest the same timer be used for the one you use for public comment, that when the time is done, whether the person answered 3 questions or 5 questions because they took a long time on question number 1 and 2, it's their decision and their time is done. So all of that has to be explained to the candidates beforehand.
Right.
Then you could have a meaningful length of time for the board to complete all the interviews. So I believe it's decision time. Do we have interviews with questions, as Dr. Frolis was suggesting? And if so, who will be the committee? And does the board want a committee to look at all the applications and reduce the number of applicants to a manageable number based on criteria that has to be published, and then bring that list to the board with the applications so that the board as a body will make that decision?
Well, I mean, I'm just thinking, I'd like to give everybody an opportunity to present. I mean, so just in general, that evaluation by a subcommittee of the
Right.
board doesn't sit
I'm not-
as well
I
with
don't
me,
like that.
but
I'm not comfortable with that.
You know.
And that's why we've always interviewed everybody.
you
And
guys, what do you think?
Right.
Well, I think that would be great, just because there might be, someone that we might miss that maybe somebody else didn't get, so I don't know.
I was comfortable at one point and uncomfortable at another. You know, I don't know, I'm having second thoughts about the interview questions. You know, it's a very important position, and we certainly need someone in here who's going to have the interest of our kids at hand, our students at hand. But I think anybody who is going to want this position will have our students at hand. And I guess we're looking at the one who's going to give us the best presentation. I would be concerned with the type of interview questions we ask, because, I mean, it could be a ringer to somebody who's really good, who know about kids, but may not know about Common Core. And So I don't know the types of questions. So once we talked about these questions, I'm saying, well, what are going to be the questions? Other than why do you want this position? So maybe we need to. I guess what I'm saying, I'm changing my mind, and maybe we need to come up with a statement to include the types of things that we were asked. I think I might feel more comfortable with that, because I certainly don't want to be here, and I'm being very transparent and very honest. I certainly don't want to sit here and listen to somebody and say, you sure know an awful lot. I don't want the speed of trust to zap me during this process, to say, is it really in effect during this process? And it's nothing against staff, it's nothing against board. I'm even talking about me. If someone asks me, what are you really looking for? I could do a giveaway of what we're looking for, just because people are asking. But I think we can all do that, and I think we can all do it with honesty. So I guess I'm looking at, Dr. Flores, let's take a look at some of the questions, and let's embed it in that statement. And so that people could just take it and run with it, and we can just, we aren't going to make everybody happy. If we have more than one person running, we know that the others are going to be unhappy. We know that. But I think that way everybody will know they certainly have a fair chance at asking the questions. And people won't say, I'm interested in doing this because I care about kids, but I don't know that much about LCAP. And people who've been to the meetings are saying a lot more than, I can say, because
I wasn't thinking about questions like that.
Let me get Danny,
Okay.
and then Dr. Flores, and then Linda.
We did this before, and it was nowhere near as complicated. We had people come in, and they read their 5-minute statement on why they wanted to be a school board member. Whoever wanted to do a presentation did their presentation. After the presentation, you started making motions to who you wanted to have appointed as a board member. The first person that got 4 votes, they were the board member. It's easy. The person only going to be here until November. Only going to be here a few months. But we didn't interview anybody. It's the political process. Some of the people you're going to know, some of them you're not. You might be swayed by some of the stuff that you say, you may not. But it's a whole lot that goes into who you decide you're going to vote on. But it doesn't have to be a complex process.
Did you ask clarifying questions?
No.
They just presented?
The person, they read their 5 minutes. You listened to them. They read their statement of why they should be a board member, and they sat down.
Did you guys create criteria?
No.
No criteria, you just had them, their statement was just
If
a
it's
statement?
5 minutes, you can't pick what someone thinks is their best attribute and explain why they think they should get the job. You let them decide what they think is going to sway board members to vote for them to be their replacement.
Okay.
But it's all an open session.
Well, before we get to the voting process, I'd like to actually go through that
Right.
and see the recommendations that were made here. But let's talk about the interview process
Right.
right now. And I guess, so we've got kind of a lot of different spectrums here. Just the 5-minute thing, the hybrid of might ask some clarifying questions, all the way to we might ask some very, several questions to all, or it's all an interview process and take a while.
Well,
So-
what you have to realize, though, it's not controlled. You don't know how many people are going to
Right.
want to
No, we
apply.
just talked about that.
So I don't know
Right.
how you can have a process where you're going to ask questions if 15 people apply.
Well, I think that's what we've come
Yeah.
to the at least the conclusion of. This could be a several-day process if
No.
you did.
Well, that's
if you
why
had
when we
50
did,
people
if you do
running.
a 5-minute thing, it's one board meeting.
Right.
They give their spiel, and
Yep.
then
Okay, Dr. Flores,
No,
and then Linda. Oh, you want
Linda was before
Linda?
me.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the simpler we make this, the better it will be. And I think the 5-minute open session time to let them say why they want to be a board member, we're going to know one way or the other. We're going to make questions, and if we do make questions, I think we then on the committee or whatever that screening process will be, have to understand that if there are certain questions that we know only those in education really know the answers, you can't really fault a person because they're not here. You know, there are certain questions that we have to be sure that if we make those questions, they're broad enough to where a person can make a logical response, or just say they don't know and not knock them out because they don't know some kind of technical answer. But I think the simpler we make it, the easier it will be. I personally don't think, I think we can do it at a board meeting, 5 minutes. I mean, we did it before and it worked fine. And like you say, this is only a few months.
Right.
So the proposal is just to have a 5-minute statement and no questions, so then we don't need a committee.
Well,
We
you
just
still need a
agree.
committee. You still
Why?
need a,
Your policy requires a committee.
because
Pardon
the
me?
policy
Your policy
says
requires.
that
Oh.
we're to,
And what will the committee do?
they will simply say that the individuals that are going to give their 5-minute speech are qualified. So we're
Oh.
required to qualify the
Okay,
candidates.
all right.
Now, what we would do is still ask the registrar of voters to qualify them, and it'll simply be an endorsement or certification of on the committee's part to say, yeah, we hereby, in accordance with Ed Code such and such, consider these candidates qualified.
Well, if the majority of the board wants just a 5-minute statement, that's fine.
What do you think, guys?
Yeah, that's fine.
Margaret,
I'm fine.
poll, we can
And-
poll everybody?
And I'm glad we heard from Linda and Danny, because if it worked the first time, there's no reason it won't work this time.
I could go with that.
That's fine.
You know?
Yeah, and I would be very comfortable with that as well in terms of the process. It's still consistent. Sure.
Now, still putting out, here's the announcement, here's what we're doing, here's our district priorities, and please address the board in whatever method, you know, you might give them some, at least, of our interest or selection criterion, or things we'd like them to talk about, or just give them
Danny's saying
just
no.
tell us why you want to be a board member. Is that all you want to ask them?
I say, yeah, I think you have to do that, because, Mike, if you give, someone's gonna write what the board's priorities
Right,
are.
right.
Which may not have any sway on
Right.
certain board
So
members.
just tell.
Yeah,
Just
let
say,
them
that's
give it.
Right, yep.
Yeah.
And that's the most, then they can invent what they want to, they just convince us. Okay, I kind of think that's it's like a candidate statement, right? Everybody gets to write their
There
own
you go,
candidate
exactly.
statement and say what they want and do it. So
Except they have 5 minutes,
well, they have 5 minutes, right? That's right.
and you don't have to pay.
And you can read a
That's
candidate
exactly
statement in
right.
5 minutes.
That's right.
Yeah, well, if you can't, yeah.
If you can't say it in 5 minutes, you're not going to be able to say it.
Yeah, I'd probably violate that consistently.
So what I have here, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that a committee of the board, less than a quorum, will review the candidate applications after the registrar of voters determines their eligibility. And this committee will certify that they have
Certify,
reviewed and that they're eligible. All eligible candidates will be interviewed, but the definition of interview will be they will be given an opportunity to make a statement, 5-minute statement in front of the board. So if you've agreed on these 3 elements, I think we can now go into the selection process.
Okay, everybody satisfied with that? Okay, great.
Okay. If you would look in your packet, and we're going to jump several pages to the page that looks like this with lots of boxes. We call that forced ranking, forced choice interview ranking sheet. Again, in this instance, you're still doing the 5-minute statement. Based on the 5-minute statement, the first candidate comes in. If you would follow with me, the first candidate, candidate number 1, in the first box, he would be 1 out of 1. When the second candidate comes, you have the name of the second candidate on the second line. If the second candidate is better than the first, now candidate number 2 will be your number 1, and candidate number 1 will be your number 2. and then you go down the list. By the end of the interview, you don't have to think of all the previous comments. You've already made a decision, statement by statement, as to what the order is of their effectiveness in what they said, in terms of what you felt was the best response for boardmanship, to be a member of the board. At the very end, you will have your entire list. The very last column will give the ranks you gave the candidates. So that will be step number one. After you complete the forced ranking, and it really doesn't take time because you're doing it immediately,
Right.
and you're comparing just the last two. And then you go to the next page, and because we can't really take, if there are 15 names and you have different ranks, we're not going to do mathematics and put all the names and all the numbers. We'll be here all night long. But it would be of greater effectiveness if you look at the next sheet, which is titled Candidate Intensity Scale. Candidate Intensity Scale, you take your top 3 candidates from your list, and you give them a rating of 1 through 10, 1 being strong, 10 being strongest. And you circle the number, and you can't circle the same number for 2 candidates. You have to make a choice as to what your rating is. Again, that's not going to take very long because you're going to take it from your ranking. You have the highest 3 items. Once that is done, we will collect that information here in public. We will collect the information, and we will have prepared the necessary forms, and in this case, we would project them on the screen. Board member number 1, these are the rankings he gave. Board member number 2, these are the rankings he gave. But no names of the board members, because you still are not taking action. Your action will be by name. So after we look at all these items, and there is really no consensus in terms of looking at the numbers, and no motion comes forward, it's possible that when we put all your numbers, that they will make such a big difference in terms of who number 1 is, then you may want to consider a motion. That doesn't happen very often. So the next page would be, now you have to boil it down to 1 candidate, but only of the names that are on the board. Which candidate is your best choice?
But there could be 5 or 6 names.
Correct. As a result of that, could be
As a
5 or 6
result
names.
of your second
Right,
sheet, there
right.
could be 5 or 6 names.
Right.
Right.
And then we'll see how
Or
many,
more. I mean,
or more.
yeah, right.
And this is where you would check and see, what the numbers look like. If necessary, you may have to go again until you dwindle the number down to 1 or 2. In fact, in one instance, we came down to 2, and it just didn't end up being 1. So in that case, we invited the 2 candidates to come back for additional conversation with the board, either in an interview setting and what have you. And then ultimately, in that second session, a decision was made.
So this is basically a way to rank and rate all of the candidates as versus, say, a board member simply being the first to make a recommendation for a vote and influencing it. You can see how that could influence and bypass
But Mr.
any kind of evaluation or review of any of the candidates. You could see how that could occur.
But Mr. Geller,
Yeah.
we're all going to review the candidates based on their statements. This is not unlike when we vote for president at the reorganization. We don't rank which one of the board members have certain qualities. So someone says, and I've seen people be nominated and not get a second, or people get nominated and don't vote the affirmative. It's going to end up the same way. We're 7 elected board members who are going to decide who we want as that next board member. All this means is I'm going to do the same thing I'm going to do in terms of making a nomination and voting. I'm going to do the same thing. I just got to manipulate it through this process that he's setting up. If I got somebody that I want, I don't care how bad they do on their statement, if that's the person I want, that's going to be my top person. Now,
Well, and I guess, yeah, that would be one way to, then why conduct the interview?
no. No, my point is, because you might have some person, because you want to have a process, and at least everyone gets an opportunity to participate. And there may be people,
I know, but
there may
you've
be
already-
folks,
you've already
there may
just
be
said,
folks, there may be folks like Mike, who are a lot more fair than me, who go into this with no preconceived notions about who they want. He just has a blank slate because he's fair like that. And after he hears all the speeches, one's going to set him on fire, and that's going to be the person that he's going to rank higher. That may happen. But my only point is, it's going to end up the same way. Someone's going to make a motion, and that person's going to be approved or not approved.
The difference is that if we go through this process, you've heard all the candidates, you've reviewed all the candidates, you have really had a discussion of the candidates without specific names of board members making those statements. Now you look at how does the board feel, and at that point you can make a motion.
Yeah, and let me say this, it all comes down to, I think we're way more political than what this ranking process does. It's like saying that we were going to do that ranking process when we vote for who will be president of the board. Usually you know walking in here who has certain votes and has a chance of becoming president or vice president. Now, we could pretend like we don't and say, hey, you know what, we're going to go through this ranking thing, but you still would end up doing the same thing. You're going to vote for who you think is the most qualified person. Some people are going to show up that you don't even expect to show up. That might be the person you think, hey, I didn't think that person was going to show up. I got to go with that person. But you're going to hear all their statements. That's the key. The key is to give everybody the opportunity to present. After that, I think it's just as easy just to make a motion on who you want.
Yeah. Mr. Dillon, before your arrival, we were talking about why a process like this would make the selection a more clinical process rather than a political process.
I understand. I understand that. Don't get me wrong. I understand where you're going with that, and that's great. But you know me, I'm just, and I have a problem
it
going
could
either
end
way.
up the same way like you're talking about. But let me ask the board members a question. Just, do you want to go through a process like this that's a stepwise process, or just the free-for-all kind of thing? Just what first comes up and just go do it? I mean, because you know, there's no right way, wrong way, whatever. We're gonna vote our, you know, who we want anyway. So, and we're all gonna probably have differing priorities. So I guess the question is, do we do the, you know, just let it take its course, or do we go the process? Dr. Hill?
Well, as much as we try to keep it clinical and not political, it's political.
Sure.
And I think the other thing, I like this process because if the person I'm recommending does not become the person to become appointed, I would feel good that we've gone through a process, and that because one person talks louder or longer, you know, is going to stir the pot. Because it's important to me that the public will look at this and say it was fair, instead of they went through all of this and they knew when they started that's who they were going to do. So I think with this process, because it's done individualized, we aren't talking about it. And at the end, when we turn in this forced choice 2 ballot, you know, our last three, maybe 3 of us would have the same person. The other 4 might have a different person. So with the count of 3, that person would be in. And I think all the candidates would look at it as being fair.
When you say count of 3, what does that mean? Count of 3?
Well, if you take a look at the forced choice 2 ballot, when we turn our recommendation in, if Abigail, Linda, and I turn in John Doe, and Mike turns in Mary Doe, and Linda turns in George Doe, and Barbara turns in Jenny Doe, we have 3 John Does.
Yes, she's talking about that.
So that would be the person who's in.
No, you still have to take action. You got to vote.
Well, when you want to,
Yeah,
want to vote for the person with the,
No, all I'm saying is, and
you're right.
you have to vote on
Correct.
the candidate. If you guys present somebody and you still don't get the 4 votes, the person doesn't get affirmed. And I guess you would go back to the next best candidate. But let me say this, when we did the process, when Ray Cadena got it, Ray Cadena was not the first person nominated. There were other people nominated. Those people didn't get the 4 votes, so then people kept making nominations. So you end up getting the same thing. There's not going to be a whole lot of people that stand out after they give their speeches that you're going to want as a school board member. There's going to be a few people.
Right.
You're going to make a motion. The ones that you don't want, that don't get the votes, they don't get the votes. The ones that do get the votes, they get the vote. And I guess that's my point. I can just foresee it. It's not going to be where it's going to be real close in terms of 15 people you're going to really want to. It'll be a waste of time to rank everybody. That's my point.
But it's the fairest, it's probably the fairest way of doing it, is the point, and it shows you have a process to do it, as versus just, well, they dismissed me from the beginning, you know? It just seems to be a fairer process to me. I mean, ultimately, in the end, I hear you, Danny. You're gonna.
What's the difference between that, though, Mike,
do
and
it.
giving somebody a 1 instead of a 10? You dismissed them.
Well, but at least you've gone through a process to consider all of them. That's
No, I
all I'm
agree.
saying.
We're going to do that by letting them speak.
Well, not necessarily. Just as you said, you might be coming in with the individual and just falling asleep during 14 of the presentations, and yeah, you know what I mean. I mean.
Now with this
I mean,
process,
my point
now
is,
with this
it
process,
would
I'm
be
gonna
a
take notes.
forced-
I'm gonna take notes on everybody.
It'll
You're
be
right.
a forced. It'll be a forced consideration of everybody is all, and it's a process. And I agree that each board member will have their own criterion for how important they consider the ranking of the list. I agree, but the fact that we did it might cause us all just to pause and say, well, gee, there were some other good candidates, and it's just a way of I think, ensuring you're truly giving consideration for other candidates.
Well, I'll get one last stab at
That's
it.
all.
When the people give their speeches,
Mhm.
there are going to be some people that are going to sway you.
Sure, I agree.
And my point
I
is,
agree.
but my point is, you don't need the chart to.
Well, then do it if you want. You don't have to do it.
I'm just saying, you know, we're professional board members.
Yeah.
We do this all the
Yeah,
time.
I-
We vote on stuff all the time. There's never an issue that we vote on when it's close, where if we would have did this matrix, it would have changed your vote. So why would this be any different?
Well, I guess I don't know that for a fact, but, you know, I just know that when we've gone through, and I don't know if you've sat on any of the interview panels for some of the staff positions that we are responsible for, and it's gone through this process.
I do interview process.
Well, you did. I think you did
But,
sit through
but
that.
I do interview process at my job. And
Well, I
I'll
know, me
admit,
too.
sometimes there's positions where
Right.
you don't have anybody and it's tough. And sometimes it's not as tough. But I'm just saying, that's just being real. And I'm not saying I have anybody for this position. I'm just saying,
Okay,
it
well,
doesn't
let's-
take more than hearing people give you a 5-minute speech to
All right, well,
determine.
let me get a
who you wanna nominate.
sense from the other board members. What do you guys want to do?
I want to do the whole process.
You want to do the process?
wanna
All right.
do- I wanna
We
do
got
this.
one for process,
I also agree with the process.
2 for process. Dr. Hill, what do you want to do?
I started, that's the end of process.
Process? Process. Danny, sorry, buddy, process. We'll go through a process. And we're going to go through, I hear
You don't
you.
have to.
The reality is.
Yeah, you're going to know which one.
All right, so I think we're going through a process.
Good.
How
Then,
about
then one last thing that I would like to get the perspective of the board. I'd like to share with you an application that is recommended by, it's not in your packet, because I wasn't sure which direction you were going to go. And Mr. Tillman, if you would take one and pass that. I'm not recommending this application form as is, but it does provide a perspective as to what the board could do. Of course, one option would be, okay. Did it go all the way down? Of course, the board can do just like the 5-minute statement. The board can just ask people to write a letter, to write something that will indicate they're interested in the board seat. Or we can have a one-page document that will give the information, their name, address, and so forth, and which would actually help the process of eligibility, the process of verification, although ultimately the registrar of voters is going to do that. So it's really up to you as to what type of format you want people to express their interest in becoming a board member. The two options would be create a form. It doesn't have to be this form. Create a form that the board is comfortable with, or just give the guidelines and say, write a letter and address these issues in your
Okay,
letter.
so here's the way I look at this. If you do an application process and you give it to all of the board members, there's probably going to be some ranking that we would do individually to say, you know what, these few people sure seem qualified, blah, 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 blah. And then you'll go through an interview process, and that might either solidify and or change your mind in the process. So you're going to, you'll influence it by perhaps the application process. But as one of, I don't know, maybe it was Margaret that said it, maybe Dr. Dr. Flores, that they're going to probably get help in preparing this and do it anyway. So are you going to get any real, value there? I don't know, maybe just like candidate statements, you can at least see where people's heads are and what they allowed to be put on the piece of paper. And so you'll have kind of a double ranking system in my mind. You'll have this form, which will definitely surface some candidates. And then you'll have the interview process that might solidify it. So I see.
Yeah. This looks like similar to when we, Abigail and Danny and I had to fill out for Democratic Party endorsement. Remember? I mean, we had to fill out something like this.
And you can make my point. It was
Yeah.
all decided before we filled it out.
Oh, was it?
Yeah,
Oh,
it was a scam.
Well, it looks like what they, it looks similar to what they asked us to
Right.
do.
Well, what do you guys think? Do you want to have an application process? What do you think? Linda? No? You don't think you need it? Danny?
You know what I think.
Yeah, really. So you want a more rigorous, I can tell, more rigorous process. I just feel it.
So what Danny's proposing is just have them make a statement.
right, that's
And don't guide them, just let them.
Well, and submit
Why do you wanna
submit
do
a
this?
letter saying, I'm interested in interviewing for
Yeah,
the
we need
position."
to ask them to
Yeah.
submit something.
Right.
No, I agree
It's
that.
not an
Whatever
application.
information they need to be qualified by the register of voters, that's
Right.
what you ask for. That's it.
Okay.
And then they're qualified, and they give their speech. Now, I will say this, you guys can take it how you want to, but don't think because you have a big process, that at the end, they're gonna think it's a fair process. You're still gonna be folks that'll be disappointed that they didn't get selected. And there may be people who are don't know anything about any of the people who hear the responses to the questions and think the people responding great and wonder why those people aren't one of the top people. And we might know something about them that we know would make it so that we wouldn't want to, regardless of how they responded. So it doesn't mean that because you have this process that it's going to be clear to everybody that the best candidate got selected.
But if you had no process, then the likelihood people would question
But
it
we have a
is
problem.
probably.
But we do
yeah,
have we
right.
do have a process.
Right.
but-
I'd like to
Dr.
ask
Flores.
if you've used this form before in other districts?
No, this is from CSBA, and I thought it was.
Oh, okay,
it was
yeah,
valuable.
okay, yeah.
We've
I
done
saw
other-
that, I saw that right there.
Right, right.
What do you think, you guys?
Yeah, I'm not too fond with some of these questions, but of course we would generate our own. I agree. We could have them present their own, however they want to present their own 5 minutes. Have them
So
do
no
that.
form, no application.
Just why
per-
do you
per
want to
se.
be a school board
Other than the
member?
minimum criterion
Right.
that would allow the registrar of voters to qualify them. Margaret, is that what you're thinking too?
Yeah, I concur, because, even
Well-
4 years ago, if I had gotten this application, I'd have never run for board.
Well, I think
I
they-
wouldn't have gotten past question number 3 before I put it in the trash can.
I think they have to at least put their name, the date, their home address, their occupation, all the things that we have to fill out when we go to the registrar of voters, so that they can check
That's
to
what
see
we're
if in
thinking.
fact they are
That's what we're thinking.
Yeah, so they can vet them.
All right, I think we're all
Yeah.
in sync then, just
Just the
whatever
criteria that the
criterion for
registrar asks for.
Registrar needs to validate that a person is eligible to.
All the forms that we have to
to
fill
run.
out.
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
right. Okay, so just eligibility, that's it. Eligibility assessment question. Make sense, everybody?
Yes.
Yes.
They'd have to do that anyway. I mean, eventually,
Yeah.
if they
Kagan?
were
Right.
elected, yeah.
Right, yeah,
You got
that,
it?
that,
Okay.
that would be
Thank you.
absolutely. absolutely good.
Okay, great.
We, can we go on to the next
Yeah,
one?
let's,
We really cannot do anything with the timelines. We cannot start the advertising or any of this until we have an actual submission of Ms. Perong's resignation.
and no, that's going to be anywhere 2-3 weeks or so. She still hasn't sold her home. It's still in limbo. The buyers, the buyer's broker, I guess, is challenging, and it's just not happening like it needs to.
What's the date where you don't have to appoint
Right,
somebody?
that's what I was going to ask.
Well, I'll let Kagan, go ahead. Go ahead.
If
6
the
months.
resignation doesn't happen before August 4,
Right.
the board would not have the option of appointing or calling a special election. So,
August 4th?
Yeah.
August 4, which means it has to be received in the office of the county superintendent of schools before that date.
I thought it was 4 months, not 3 months.
No, 4 months from the end of the term. The
In
end
other
of the
words,
term is
It's
December 4.
December, oh, okay.
Your
not
The first
November.
Friday in
No,
December
November. Okay.
is the end of the term.
All right,
So
okay.
4 months from that would
From
be
that.
August 4.
Not election.
Okay,
Yeah,
not
no,
election.
election.
Okay, I was.
No, not the,
okay,
that's
I
right.
was working
Well,
that.
it's really confusing because the code, some they refer to the election and some they refer to the
Right,
end of, but the deadline of the 4 months is from the end of the term, not the election date. And the timeline for the board to complete the process in 60 days, so the county superintendent doesn't call for a special election, would start from the date that the county superintendent receives the letter.
So we have to appoint within 60 days,
Yes.
or the election needs to occur and be run by the county.
Right, right,
Right.
and which would be really an unfortunate thing
Well, of
because
course, yeah.
he has, the code says he has to call the election. If
Right.
he doesn't, then he's violating the law. But if you have 4 months left and he calls the election, by the time you have the election, it will probably October. So the person gets elected, you verify another week, he probably will be in office for 3 weeks before you have the election. So, and because of that, it's good to be ready and you move forward.
So we've made the appropriate decisions that
I
you
believe- yes.
need to have to kind of hone in on this process.
Correct.
Get it back to us.
Correct.
And we can publish this as part of that. We can perhaps even start drafting some of the advertisements. and
Correct,
things like that,
correct.
So we're ready when
Right,
we
yeah,
go and
yeah.
bang it out.
So many times I went to my computer to draft the announcement, and then I said, what are you going to advertise? You still don't know
Right.
what direction the board will go. So we haven't done that, but this will give us a chance to actually complete all that
Right.
work even before.
Is there
Ms.
anything
Braun
else
submits
you
her
need from this board on process, et cetera, other than a date that would, that you need to include in this
If we look at the
preparation work?
timelines, just for 1 second, it's the second page on your sheet. What we're going to have to start with is what dates, item 5 and 6. I have 5 and 6. These are 2 dates for interviews in case you can't complete all of the candidates in 1 day. But I think what we need to do is determine what date is possible for the board. And we shouldn't do it now because it's too early. But
Well-
at some point, we will come to you to get from you, or we could actually
Okay,
do
well,
it
the
through.
first question, then I'd lay, we probably wouldn't want to incorporate this as part of a regular school board meeting, right?
I think we should.
Or what do you think?
I think we should. I think it should be televised. And I think
Well,
it's-
it will be anyway.
I think it should be as regular as possible so everybody can participate and know it's here and just clear off
And,
the calendar.
all right, well, then I guess the question would be, you probably want that school board meeting not to have very many other agenda items, or we might actually set a new record.
I agree.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
It
The-
all
I
depends
guess-
on the number of candidates.
Depends
It depends on the number of candidates, I agree.
Right.
But, so I suppose if it's a few candidates, we could perhaps consider.
It's not gonna be a few.
Well, I agree with you, Danny,
Yeah.
but it's gonna, my point is, it's gonna take a couple hours at least, in my mind.
Yeah.
And if it's that long and you do it as part of a regular board meeting, we'll set history.
You know what, maybe you can have a plan A and a plan B.
Yeah, right.
If we get more than 15 people, then we go to Danny's plan. If we got less than 15, we do this long drawn out.
Oh, I see. You're trying to change the process even after a 6-1 vote? I see. He doesn't give up, does he?
In Danny's defense, it was a 5-1 vote with
Right,
one
right, right,
abstention.
Yeah, I got it, yeah. Got it. And technically, it wasn't a vote, but.
Yeah. But I think we need to come to the board needs to come to some agreement. If the board wants to do it on a regular board meeting, that minimizes administration's problem in terms of finding a date. Whatever the timelines say, that particular meeting will be just the interview and not conduct business. But if there's urgent business that needs to be conducted, then staff may request another special meeting in order to conduct the business if it's a deadline issue. But we can also wait and see if we will need a second day for interview. If you have 50 candidates, you're not going to be able to finish 50 candidates even if it's 5 minutes each. So we may need another special meeting to continue the interviews if needed.
Couldn't we also start our board meeting at, say, 4?
If the board members can be present at 4.
Like 4 to 5:30 could be,
It's gonna be longer than that.
Yeah, I think it will be too.
No, start, at least you gain an hour and a half.
But I really think that it should start after the 5:30 period because our board meeting's at 5:30. I think it's important to make sure it's as open a process as possible and people don't feel excluded. And that's the reason why we have our board meetings at 5:30. I think we lose sight of that sometimes. But I think we purposely have board meetings at 5:30 so people can get off work and still come and participate. And I don't think there's anything more critical that we do than selecting another board member. That's everything. So I think
Then I'd say do a special meeting. You do it on that off Tuesday or something, you know. That'd probably be the safest choice, guys, in my mind, is just pick an off Tuesday and that's it,
at 5:30.
at 5:30.
Could I ask a question?
Dr. Hill?
How long is the process once Bobby turns in her letter? Because, we're talking about June. We have another week after this week, and we'll be into June. So once she turns in her letter, is it about a month? Because you have to put it in the newspaper for a period of time, has to go through the registrar of voters. It seems like it might be July or even August
Yeah,
before we even have the
Well, it
meeting.
can't be August because it's got to be 60 days, right?
No, the appointment doesn't have to be before August 4. Her resignation has to be received by the county
No, I
superintendent
know,
by
but we
August
got
4.
60 days to act.
That is, if it's received on June 4, then August 4 will be your deadline.
Right.
So your deadline is 60 days from the date the county superintendent receives the
So
letter
it
of
can't go
resignation.
longer than that.
Right.
We can't take longer than that.
But Mike, you bring up another point. There was a suggestion to even cancel some meetings in the summer. So a lot of times the summer meetings are kind of light. So why wouldn't you just have it on regular?
That'd be great if we could do that. That's all I'm saying.
And it's not
So,
going to happen until July.
um,
That's obvious.
Right. Yeah, I mean, even if you start now,
Right.
by the time you get to the interviews, it will
Well,
be
why don't we
July.
set that as a goal? And if, Dale, I know, you're being inundated with agenda items as the end of the year stuff comes in. Yes, sir.
We will make happen whatever the board's will is. You bet.
Well, I mean, I think the goal would be not to have an additional board meeting that staff has to attend during the summer,
Yeah.
I think that's what everybody's kind of
There you go.
thinking. And so if that's possible, and you still conduct business and get all the decisions you need made, great.
I
Sound like
prefer
fun?
a regular meeting as well.
Okay, great. All right, let's make that, let's try. Okay, what else?
I think that's it. I'm sure on my way out of here, I'm going to remember I should have mentioned this, even though I have my notes. No, you can keep them.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other comments, folks? If not, we can draw this to a close and open our meeting, perhaps even on time. Okay, great.